morning, good evening, good day, greetings, and a little bit aside of salutations. Welcome to the Safe Room featuring Security Side Quest. My name is Tristan Wadi, and thank you for joining me today on another epic journey, adventure, form, or forum. And for you first-time joiners, thank you for joining today. As always, I also like to add a little bit of helping to say hi to producer Jeff. Thank you for doing the producing as you always do. And as I get back to introducing myself for the first timers, my name is Tristan Wadi. I come to you from the Professional Services Division of AWS, where we like to accelerate customers' journey to the cloud in a secure manner, fashion, form, and way. And usually I have for us who join the response, but I think of a certain topic. But to add a little bit of suspense there, I will say feel free to put in the chat where you're dialing in from, where you're tuning in from, or you're just listening, or maybe you're feeling your presence somewhere out there because it's the holidays, and there's certain horrifying variety because of the month, but it's also still cybersecurity month. So one of the questions I would pose, Jasper, thank you for joining from Canada. One of the questions I would pose to you is, hey, why don't we ask something in relation to the theme? And that question is going to be an interesting one, which I will pose to you. Would you rather split up to cover more ground faster or stay together and move slowly? And Russ is not here, so this is what I was talking about. I think we split up for this episode. So I think one of those things to cover ground faster, I would lean towards kind of doing that approach depending on the situation, right? It's how many people are around, where are we, and how exactly did we get there? Is it something we're exploring, just because of the fun of it? Or were we brought somewhere where we're like, hey, we need to find a way out of this house, so let's split up. In that case, I would stick together. But feel free to put your answer in the chat, as well as continue to say hi. Velvet from Texas, thank you for joining today. So I think today's theme, topic, the haunted infrastructure, right? If we stay on the theme of kind of the haunted house variety. Last week, we came from the 5 Nights at Parameter Store, where can you last until the credential rotation? Was the question we asked ourselves throughout the episode. Now we continue on with the theme of trying to ask or think about, okay, if there's something going on in my infrastructure, how do I know? Last week, we talked about monitors and a whole bunch of items, right? And Eric, yes, definitely. Is it Scooby-Doo or a slasher film? it all depends on which way we're going. If it's Scooby-Doo, I'll do the little quick runaway and try and figure it out. But Jasper, thank you. I appreciate that. I think if we were to run towards a Zoinks, with, hey, what was that log that passed by, that flew by as I was scrolling by? Well, that's kind of one of the topics that we wanted to get into, right? Is understanding the key components and concepts of cloud security investigation and why they matter, right? Because we're trying to demystify some of the essential building blocks when it comes to security investigation, right? I know we're trying to get away from those Zoinks moments, right? If you know what Zoinks is, 10 billion points to you, because we're heading down that same theme today. One of the services that we're going to touch upon is with Amazon Detective, and kind of going towards that route of, hey, figuring out if the CloudTrail, the VPC, the guard duty findings all correlate to paint a bigger picture, right? And we'll also touch upon how we can spot some clues in order to better investigate these different items and areas. So I think that's a key component of just thinking about, hey, each log, each piece of evidence is crucial to your overall understanding of your environment, right? Because when you're developing your target state security strategy, one of the pieces is your investigations. If something were to happen within your organization, how do you respond to it? How do you think about what some of the most common indicators of compromise are, and how do you adapt to it within your environment? Those are all key pieces of the puzzle. And sticking with the theme as well, if we, hey, let's split up. Let's split up, gang. That's kind of the catchphrase that they go by. How do you think about that from the IR perspective? There's different approaches to a security incident response, and you need to use various investigations during something that's occurring. So exactly how do we do this? Well, in the famous words of a certain cartoon person, let's split up and divide this strategy, but does it work in practicality? That's some of the things that we have to explore. So what are the trade-offs between the different investigation approaches, right? How do you do a comprehensive deep dive, but a rapid triage? I think that's an important part to consider, especially when you have certain services enabled, hopefully. And if you don't, that's where you get the zoinks moment, because something like guard duty findings, right? How do you investigate those when they pop up so that eventually you can unmask the threats within your environment? I'm using a lot of puns because it helps it to kind of retain your memory, because when you think of unmasking the security threats, you're starting to figure out, hey, how do we piece together all the different findings to actually determine the true culprit? Because some of the things are causes and some of the effects. And what a true incident responder does is not jump to the effect. They look at, okay, what caused this? Was it somebody that was sitting within the environment? Is it somebody who was doing something that they weren't supposed to, or that they didn't know they were not supposed to do? I think I got that, right? So as we start to go through, and thank you, I appreciate it, Velvet, right? The haunted infrastructure. Yes, it's a theme that you may not think of it in that context, but it is what keeps a lot of CISOs up at night, because they're trying to figure out, okay, what's happening within my environment before it happens? Or did something happen that caused this spike in utilization, or that caused this little bit of a panic within the organization? These are different types of things you have to consider, because when you overall think of, hey, what is it that keeps you up at night? What is the security monster that you're trying to unmask? Right? Think of, if it's shadow IT, is it a shapeshifter, right? It's mysterious, unmanaged resources. That could be one item. Or the misconfiguration mummy, right? And that's MUMMY, right? The mummy, wrapped in exposed, settings. Or we could continue down with the insider werewolf, trusted friend by day, but threat by night, or at 5 p.m. Eastern, or whatever time zone you're coming from. Those are all things you have to think of when you're trying to unmask what exactly is happening within the environment. And that's where we're trying to get to, right, within this conversation. So when we think of starting from the top of what's that log, that's kind of usually the key starting point for a lot of individuals, because log gets generated or finding gets generated. Okay, what happened? And then correlating that to, let's say, a run book or something along those lines. Those are all key aspects that we have to think about. So one of the items that I would say to help you think about that is, hey, what is the structure supposed to look like? And that's where we kind of go towards our first part of the puzzle. And what is that first part of the puzzle? Well, it's kind of figuring out what a secure architecture looks like. And lucky for us, we have a starting point with that. And that is going to be the security reference architecture. So within the SRA, it gives you the foundational items of, hey, what has worked within different customer environments, different configurations, what are known patterns that are secure? And then this architecture framework was built based on that. So if you were to take that step to understand the different components, you start to figure out exactly that. Is, hey, I know what's going on. I know how my system is designed. Now I can start to see the ebb and flow of how that works. So as we continue on with just that key piece of understanding, I think a place we kind of want to go into within this conversation is the security tooling account, which is one of those often misunderstood accounts of, okay, this is where the logs go, right? No, these are the conversations you have with different stakeholders because they think security tooling, oh, the security logs should go here. Well, you also have a logging archiving account, and that's a side quest for another day. But one of the pieces that you want to consider is, what services do you see? You start to see, okay, Amazon Event Bridge, Config Aggregator, Firewall Manager, Macy, Detective, all these services come to you in such a manner that it's important to consider that, one, they're things that are analyzing or managing, or they're tooling. I know it's in the name, but we say it 3 times for the people on the other side of the internet, because Amazon Detective is in here. And it's an important service for that exact reason. Because when you think about the security tooling account, you should start to think about, do I have these services enabled? Do I have the capacity to respond to a threat, to analyze a threat, to triage a threat? And you can keep going down until you get to that Jinkies moment. Because when you start to think about, okay, we should split up, do you need to if you have certain services enabled? And that is the key component of today's talk, because Amazon Detective helps you during an investigation, because it helps you to provide that pane of glass that you're looking for, right? So think of it this way. If we had an analogy, right? Detective. So we'll go with detective. Solving a crime after it happened. I watch a lot of anime, so pick a different anime that's based on detection, right? So imagine your AWS environment. It's like a large office building, right? Guard duty is going to be the security alarm that goes off when something suspicious happens. Security hub is going to be the security monitoring room, showing all the alarms. But the detective arrives after the alarms and investigates what actually happened here. And with that analogy, you kind of see how they all work together. Because when an alarm triggers, you first say, hello, alarm, and hello, no heal. The second piece is you start to figure out, okay, you're gathering the evidence from the CloudTrail, from the VPC flow logs, from the guard duty logs, right? Or guard duty findings, I should say. And then you're trying to create a timeline of what occurred. And you're trying to see what happened before, during, and after the incident itself, till you get to a point where you can connect the dots and link IP addresses and users and resources and actions all together, so that you get to the point of, okay, how can I visually represent this? And that's where usually people break out the board and the little aspects. What are the little aspects? They're the threads that connect each of these pieces of the puzzle, right? So these are all pieces of the I would say the pie. I was trying to get to puzzle again, and we have a question. What role does AWS Security Hub play in all of this? Well, in our analogy, if we were going with the office building, Security Hub is, think of the security monitoring room showing all of the alarms. So guard duty is the thing that's, alarming something suspicious, and Security Hub is that monitoring room. Thank you for that question, right? And the detective is going in there to see, hey, what happened here, right? What is the simple item or alert? So as you start to understand this piece, if something like an unusual API call from EC2 instance happens, okay, without detective, you have to manually dig through the log entries, trying to piece together what happened. And in a time-critical event, that's not the best use of time. Because even if you say, hey, let's split up, gang, let's go down, you go down this route and you go down this route. Well, if it takes you a week to figure out something, you're going to miss some of the clues, because now you have to try and correlate a longer period of time. And if there's somebody sitting inside your environment, if there's an infrastructure or something performing reconnaissance, think of the different threat modeling frameworks. You have the MITRE ATT&CK and you have STRIDE and all those good things, right? All those pieces are trying to understand, hey, one, how do we know which instance made the call? If we're going with an unusual API call analogy. And as well, thank you as well. Yes, protection awareness and like forensic accounting, right? You're trying to piece together, right? You're the detective, right? You're trying to have where DFIR is a whole piece in itself, but from a simple perspective, you want to go through and understand with detective how you say who made the call, what user role was involved, and what is the timeline of related activities, what are the behaviors unusual for resources, and that's something detective can help you to build up, right? And yeah, and also to that point, right? Sometimes people have time to cover the tracks, or they did an exfiltrated, or it's just been a period of time, so you have more logs to sort through, right? So the bottom line is detective turns weeks of manual investigation into kind of minutes with a visual analysis. And you may say, how does this happen? How do you get here? Well, the key piece to understanding is exactly what your scenario is, right? A lot of the times is looking for that jinkies moment, the aha, the I spot the clue. And part of it is the baseline versus like something's wrong here. There's some activity that's happening that's not of usual. Detective automatically has that baselining ability built into it where it can help you understand, let's say, across 4 dimensions: the log patterns, resource trends, geographical patterns, and API call volumes, right? These kind of things help you to pick up, okay, this is unusual for this resource. And it sticks out like that, right? So as you go through, you start to figure out, okay, this user login pattern, it's 3 a.m. at night. What? The person would be sleeping. This is Pacific time. This is East Coast time. Why are they in the machine? Then you start to figure out, where is this being accessed from? And you start to look at common attack patterns and indicators as well, right? Because within the fundamental attack patterns, you start to figure out some of the characteristics that come with it, right? So figure out the unusual escalations, right? Or I should say the unusual access patterns that lead to privilege escalations, right? All pieces of the puzzle that you're trying to go down. Because when you start to think about how credentials can be compromised, how data exfiltration happens, it's usually the small things, those links together between all these different items. Because if you see, hey, somebody trying to access a certain EC2 instance, and then you see certain identity commands, you start to see, hey, this S3 bucket has a little bit more permissions than it did. Now you start to put together the overall pattern of what's happening. Yes. And it's a big as you start to go down and understand, wait, all these pieces kind of fit together. So if we're trying to understand a little bit better how we kind of deal with this, I think the first place we start is understanding some of the patterns. And the best way to do that is to think of, hey, what happened in the past? And that's where we get to understanding some of the legends, right? And that's where we get to our side quests. So as side quest legend has it, I would dim the lights and put on the storms, but that's for another, holiday season. So as we start to go down and understand, hey, what happened in the past that we need to kind of explore a little bit, let's set some context. Let's think of a company, right? We'll say it's Coolsville Cloud Computing, right? Another reference, 10 billion points to you if you know where Coolsville is. Think about, they have a lot of AWS accounts, 200 plus. And they're starting to be faced with the challenge of, hey, we have a security team. They may not be as mature yet, but we're trying to work towards there. And we enabled some guard duty. We enabled, the different logging sources. But we're starting to host everything in a certain way. And what is that way? Well, the plot thickens because they have all these services. They have instances. And now they're starting to see, hey, these API calls, they're starting to appear from unknown locations. They're starting to see suspicious IAM roles were assumed at, let's say, the stroke of midnight, right? And then strange traffic patterns. We start to see a sense of, hey, this doesn't make sense for our environment. And we also ask the questions of how do we then approach something that happens in the past? That's exactly the beauty of detective, where when something is happening, right? Think of the alerts. Think of the analogy we came up with. If something happens to an EC2 instance, for example, we start to figure out, okay, guard duty alerts to it. Then you have security hub, which is that security room we spoke about. Now detective is coming later. So that's a past event, right? And if you want to do a real past analysis as an IR person, the kind of side tangent on that is you can have the logs within an S3 bucket within your centralized login archive account. You could do some type of, you could use Amazon Glue and Athena to do an ad hoc query within the environment based on a log time frame. But that's kind of a quick analogy. But for now, as a detective, especially within our scenario, I think it will help to dive in and show kind of the visualization of this, right? So if we have our side quest board for our Coolsville scenario, and essentially the side quest board is a visualization of our environment, well, we have our AWS environment here. And then we have some unauthorized users and API calls just randomly from out here. Way over here, we have our authenticated users kind of going down the route of understanding, right? So when you start to figure out all the pieces of the puzzle, how do I do that? That's usually the question that you kind of get stun locked, right? When you're trying to figure it out as a new responder, right? Because do you know truly what spooky signals make you suspect something is going on, right? How do you know this is not an update versus a strange login, right? What are some of the strange API patterns? What are some of the ghostly networking traffics? What are some of the suspicious role changes as we continue to go down and understand these key components? Well, I think the place to start off is understanding that you have certain services in place. So with that being said, I have Security Hub and I play it face up because it's on. And if I am this individual trying to get towards the path of understanding what's happening within my environment, well, sometimes the path is a little bit more linear than you think. So we have Security Hub and environment. Oh, great. It's absorbing some of the logging traffic. It's getting to the point where, hey, I have guard duty on and it has the findings. I have Security Hub. So I feel like I should be on the path that fits my environmental status, right? We're building that bridge a little bit at a time. But I figure one of the key components that you have to think about is, all right, what happens if you start to see more identity calls? How do you handle that? Well, I think that's a key part of it. And that's where detective comes into play. Because with detective, now you have these different pieces of the puzzle that you can start to think about in a certain way. Because you can see some of the guard duty findings, you can see Security Hub, you're seeing all these aggregation of different pieces. And as you noticed and noted before, within the reference architecture, it sits in the security tooling account. So with that being said, now we can start to get somewhere. Because what I can do as a responder is start to think about, do we have any types of automation to take care of this? Right? Is there an approval workflow that you can probably kick off? Or do you automatically have it in a more complex, and I'll just put this somewhere over here, right? A little workflow, right? A step function workflow where it has a little bit more complexity into it. But the simple part I want you to understand is if you have all these pieces of the puzzle and you're a detective, now you can start to triage things in a little bit of a different light because you know what is happening within your environment, because you were able to kind of work your way backwards from, the mystery. Because some of the challenges that we were having was, hey, how do we find connections between the spooky threats? How do we map out a monster's movements, aka attacker? Or how do we reconstruct the timeline to the point of the earlier comment? Well, part of that becomes through the behavioral analysis that we have to take. So as we start to think about this in a different way, now we could get to the point of, okay, I want to understand and dive into this, but I don't want to do the manual work. So automation. And we can have toll gates, we can have approval gates, all those good things, all those pieces of the puzzle. Because when we set up an investigation dashboard, and I'll put the step function away for a second. So what you start to get to is, hey, how can we start to set up the automation in such a way that we have pivot points within our infrastructure? So if something goes bump in the night, we can automatically pivot that out, right? So for example, if you have a security group, do you have an automatic remediation, or I should say automatic isolation that, hey, weird instance, isolate, right? For deeper forensic analysis. Is that part of your plan? Is there a way that you can collect all of the different clues to help you piece this together? I think it's important questions to bring up, because as a security person, as an incident responser, as an owner of an AWS environment, I would like to know kind of from a holistic standpoint, what's happening within my environment. And usually when you get down this path, it starts to look a little bit more connected in a way that fits my organizational environment, that overall protects my, resources. And I say resources in a specific way because there's a lot of resources that you have to configure and protect. So, as always, it's dangerous to go alone. So take a friend. So in order to figure out who that friend is, sometimes we have to hit the good old pause game button, or I say the Zach Morris timeout, and start to get to a point where, okay, how do we understand a little bit more in depth what we need to do, right? So I think the place to start with this is maybe we'll take a step back. Well, that's the thing. When you take that step back, sometimes it affects your environment. Sometimes you have to get to a point where you kind of know what to do. Right? So as I took that dramatic pause, the whole reason I did that was to show you that there's more to figuring out. So what I mean by that is sometimes you have to split up. So that's where triaging and some of the IR principles get into it. And I'll let my co-host Russ explain that at a future date and time. But what you're essentially trying to do is determine the investigation priority. That's the key aspect. Because if you look at, again, 4 dimensions of, hey, this is a risk-based analysis based on threat type and attack vectors and so on and so forth, right? Business impact, resource sensitivity, right? Different workloads have different responsibilities within the environment. So this is where you can categorize incidents into different priority tiers and allocate the resources to investigate. So when you say, hey, let's split up, you're doing it in a manner, fashion, form, and way that fits your environment. So how do we begin this triage process? Well, I think it all starts from the foundations, the core components. So as you start to go into your environment and understand these core components, I think a key piece of this is, all right, understanding that not all security alerts are deserving of equal attention. They deserve effective triage to help rapidly determine when incidents occur within your environment, how you respond to it. I let that sit and take a dramatic pause for the reason of just going through. Hey, okay, now this is what we're going to do. You take a look at this alert because it's a critical and high alert, right? And you have the triaging methodology, right? You have the priority tiers within your environment that links to your ticketing system, so on and so forth, right? So now that you're an active responder that's going through this, you can start to get to a place of, okay, do we truly have a playbook or a run book that could go through this alert? Is it a data exfiltration in progress that requires immediate response, or is it a reconnaissance activity that allows some time for a thorough investigation? Because what you want to make sure of is that you triage appropriately and that you have the SLAs and the different pieces of documentation for the compliance folks. As always, hello, compliance on the other side. You want to figure out, when you triage these cases, did you perform, that risk-based assessment? Because I know usually if there's a pattern and it's determined a escalation that needs to happen, and then usually organizations have like a conference bridge that's spun up and so on, responding tendencies. So what are the different investigation paths that you need to take, right? So as you start to go through and understand these components, I think that's an important part of the workflow. And the SCP says there are companies focused on transitive dependencies now and help with that part. Yes, that's a big part of it, right? Is if you don't have all the capabilities within your organization, the most important part is identifying that you don't have the capabilities for that in your organization, because you can have the framework, you can have the tool set, but for the individuals, that people part of the process, sometimes it helps to have a partner, right? Dangerous to go alone. So take this friend, right? Because you want to say, we're going to focus on this particular part because this is 100% environmental specific. And we have the deep knowledge that comes with that, right? But some of the other pieces can help if you don't, have the resources that maybe aren't that deep within the particular technology that you're looking into. So usually that's where the conference bridge scenario comes into play. But I digress. Detective will help you to, let's say, expedite that anomaly detection in your workflow, right? Because instance or something along that line has happened. Now you're trying to piece together the part of the puzzle of, okay, this kind of looks like something suspicious. Something is going bump in my infrastructure. And I'm trying to piece together exactly what that is. So I think if I were to summarize that piece of it, one of the most critical decisions during a security incident is determining when to escalate. And that's an important part of having the correct tool set, because once you piece together some common threads, that's when the escalation is off to the roof. Off to the roof. I think I'll coin that phrase, right? Because you're going up the steps. But when you start to go and understand the different pieces of an escalation process and the SLAs, this should be built on the tool set and your processes, your procedures, how users are leveraging your environment, right? And that's where having team role definitions come into play, having communication channels, and the required documentation, right? Good parts. Runbooks, automated runbooks, even better, right? Handoff procedures, even better. Because one of the things, if you're looking at all these different items, even though you have detective, the important part is being able to communicate and hand off when needed. Because when you're trying to unmask one of the villains, the monsters, there's there's a lot of complexities that come with it. So having the abundance of information and data is good part, right? Yes. Off the roof, right? That's the next step. You go up to the roof and then off the roof. So when you start to think about, hey, what disguise is the hardest to unmask within your organization? I think that's a interesting piece to think about. So if we were to keep with our theme and our analogies, so think of the different types of disguises villains may take, aka your threat actors. Well, you can have the slow stalking swamp master, or you can have the key stealing key master, or you can have the data snatching phantom. And I'm running out of different monster analogies, but the resource draining vampire. All these are parts that you have to consider, right? Is which one of these? Feel free to put it in chat, right? Which one of these are you most concerned about, right? I don't know. Myself, the data snatching phantom might be one of the key pieces. But as you're starting to think about this, I think learning how to unmask the different security threats plays a big part. And I think one of the pieces that we can get to is, okay, if we have, I don't know, certain resources, like, hey, how do I kind of get this integrated, especially with such an influx of data, right? Because you have the initial compromise, you have the attack progression markers, things of that nature. I think one way we can dig in is understanding some pieces of the code. So let me share out something we can dive into. So as I bring up some pieces of the code, this is a simple integration script that's within AWS samples, right? And essentially what we're looking at here is the different ways that you can integrate Amazon Detective with your overall security strategy, right? AKA Security Lake plays a big part, because within this template, within this repo that you can pull down, which we'll show in a bit, it gives you some starting off points. And what I find is interesting is within the YAML file itself, it's essentially setting up a 4-step automated workflow, right? Where you're giving security lakes, resource identifier, you're doing the IAM roles to query the data, and you're doing some optional S3 buckets for query results. So that kind of goes back to the comment that was earlier, like, how do I look at past items? Well, if you have something like Security Lake plus this integration, you can kind of go now, right? Yes, and I know the red pattern, we just downloaded the sample. But I think the key pieces of this I wanted to focus on and bring attention to is there's a lot of different pieces of this that you can gather as sample code that you can integrate into your environment with some great services, right? So if we're looking at, okay, how do I kind of integrate and have that longevity in there where you're leveraging some of the tools in a certain way that helps you with your IR posture? It's a big part of the puzzle, right? So if I actually show this piece, right, you can kind of see, hey, these are all pieces of the puzzle that you need to, consider a little bit, right? So we have this detective integration with Security Lake here. And just like this says, and as I was alluding to earlier, okay, you can run this YAML file, and within it, you can have the transitional pieces of getting to the point of, okay, how does this fit my environment? How can I just run this so that, hey, there's an integration standpoint? Or how do I take that step back just to figure out, hey, does this apply to me? And that's a question we often hear is, do I really need to know that component? Do I really need to implement Security Lake? Well, no. What we're looking at is what can you plug and play within the different areas to make sure that you cover your bases? It's kind of like code scanning, where there's different tools that you can use. But what essentially you want to do is make sure that you have the different components in, or I should say, set up in such a manner that it makes sense to your organization. Right? So if you don't have security lake, maybe you have S3 buckets. Then you can leverage those S3 buckets in such a manner that you can, ad hoc query them using Athena and Glue. Right? Simple components, simple ways, simple setups. So as you start to go through that route, you help yourself to understand your environment a little bit better. Right? So if you're looking for that code itself, I pulled it exactly out of that repo right there, where you're essentially going towards, share it out. Here we go. So Detective Security Lake integration, right? So provides a cloud template that you can use in such a manner that it streamlines your integration, right? Simple standpoint, there's some pros to leveraging it this way, but if you feel that this is more of a walk instead of a crawl, or a run instead of a walk, it's just another component that you can pull from within your environment. But I think the key piece to kind of delve into and understand is, hey, how can we kind of go through the pattern of diving a little bit deeper to unmasking those threats? Because we spoke about them, right? All these different items. We're trying to reconstruct the timeline. We're trying to fix and correlate and do all these type of things, right? So I think the key component that we need to get to is understanding, how do we kind of level up our own knowledge, right? I know, as I always say, there's a couple different ways that you can go about this. But I think one of the key aspects that I would touch upon is, one, get certificate knowledge, as I put that into place, right? Other way to do this is to go on maybe something of a side quest that is related to that of, what do they call it? Oh yeah, a knowledge quest, right? So knowledge quest is essentially those pieces of information you gather, right? It could be after your 5 a.m. run. You grab the beverage of your choice, coffee, tea, water, or other, and then you sit down and you say, hey, how can I kind of go on a knowledge quest? How can I dig a little bit deeper? How can I get to the place where I essentially build some of the things that apply to my environment? Well, that's a good thing. We're here to do that, right? I know you want to build the aura in your knowledge quest, but one of the things that you want to kind of build is an understanding of that mysterious haunted infrastructure that you have, right? And that haunted infrastructure usually comes at, one of the I would say prices of, hey, what's happening in our environment? That question that's going to be asked a couple of times. So if you don't know how to start, well, this is where you dive into L100, because knowledge quests are divided into pieces that are digestible in multiple phases, multiple maturity values. So in this L100, when you're a mystery trainee, I think the key component to remember is that, hey, you have services like Detective. So, hey, what can you do with Detective? This is where I always suggest going to a service. If you don't know anything about it, right, this is where you go on your knowledge quest. It's just, hey, what are some of the concepts and terminologies of that service? What's an admin account? What's a behavioral graph, right? All these are components that you can dive into, that you get to a certain place of understanding of, okay, I kind of understand what this service does. Then you start to get a command line, and you start to get to the console and understanding, and eventually you go from, sandbox to dev to UAT to prod, depending on your setup. And within this particular case, you start to get to a point of, all right, I have some of the concepts of detective down, I have within the environment, now I can start to get to a place where I can do some investigations, right? And you can get to a place where you can triage. That's an important part of this whole puzzle. Because if you're at L100 trying to get to a place where, hey, I'm trying to triage some event that is occurring within my environment right now, Amazon Detective is there. Because remember our scenario. If there's one thing you take away today, something like EC2 alert happens, guard duty, initial alert, security hub is the security monitoring room, and now detective comes in after with the cup of coffee and says, okay, what happened? That's kind of what's in my head for every detective movie, series, or anime, right? What happened? And now you can start to answer that a little bit better because you start to understand, okay, this is the piece of the puzzle I was missing before to help me kind of in a speedy way explain exactly that. Especially if you were to take this to a real world scenario and say, hey, what happened in our environment? Well, A, B, and C, right? Based on this visualization, based on this graph. And now you start to get more into, hey, what is the security incident response strategy? And that kind of leads you into the realm of not a trainee, but a seasoned junior detective. Because you start to think of and ask the questions of the who, what, when, why, and how, right? That can correlate to CloudTrail logs of the who, what, when, why, how as you're going through. And if you are trying to look at those different pieces, are you well architected? It's a question that you will ask yourself, and others will ask that question of you. So I think that's a good place to start, as well as just going through what's the security response strategy? Are we prepared? And to the earlier point, do we have the people in order to triage an event, to respond to a security event? Can we put automation processes? These are all the pieces of the puzzle you as a junior detective are trying to figure out. So as you start to hear and start to think about, okay, something's happening in the environment. What is usually the response? It's alarm goes off, and then yeah, it's a wake-up call because you start to hear the beat keep going. You start to hear stuff fall. You start to hear people say, hey, something is happening within our infrastructure. What is happening? There's that haunting perspective that comes into it. So understanding that you have the people, the processes, but also understanding that you have maybe something of, I would say, the target state security. No, there's another piece. There's something of a plan variety, which I'll save for later. There's some spoilers in the name of this page, but the other piece is you have the automation capabilities, I should say, right? To go from a junior detective to a place of understanding and growth in such a way that you're no longer considered a detective. You are considered of somewhat a variety of, hey, do I take a step back at periods of time and think about my environment? Do you take a time to be a seasoned sleuth? Yes. I know it's one of those words. It's two S's in there, right? So if you're seasoned, now you start to go into, hey, we have a SIM. Now I want to optimize that SIM, or I want to just figure out what tools can I run. Can I run something like an open search service, right? And this is another piece of the puzzle, right? So if we were to take this into account as a seasoned person, you're outside more of this, the CloudTrail, and you're using detective and you're using different mechanisms to come together. Because look at some of the log and I was going to say analytics, analysis basics that you need to have. Well, how to search and specify time range, all these different items that you can use. And this is another tool within your environment. What the part I want to stress is when we say, hey, let's split up, these are the services that you start to think about that are holistic in the manner that are pulling from different items so you can come to a conclusion a little bit faster, right? So if something happens like an EC2 compromise, okay, you can use OpenSearch. But if you have other individuals within your organization that can help you, sometimes different services and different tools work out for different people. So if you have that junior detective, you have that initial triaging person, going back to, hey, detective can be the right way for you. Right? So when you think of, hey, can I use the detective API to investigate guard duty security findings and enrich data within Security Hub? I would say sign me up, right? As one of the key components. Let's open this image a little bit deeper. So within this blog post, we start to go down the route of, hey, if we have a guard duty alert that triggers, goes Security Hub, it receives the finding, okay, it goes to Event Bridge, that kicks off a Lambda. You notice the automation part in this, right? I'll take that pause and come back. So eventually, you have detective. The Lambda function starts a detective investigation. Interesting, because the plot thickens a little bit, just like Texas Toast, because what you start to get to is an automation workflow of having all the different pieces of information and be able to investigate and correlate a little bit deeper within your environment. And that's the part you want to get to, because eventually within your workflow, you can get to the point where, hey, the Lambda function updates Security Hub findings with investigative data. That's using detective in that seasoned sleuth manner, right? Little pieces of the puzzle. So when you take that step back to think about it a little bit deeper, you kind of recall all the different items we were just speaking about, right? You're thinking about the event chain analysis. You're thinking about, hey, how all these factors came together. And if there's something happening in the environment, what are the containment steps that we're taking? What are the remediation actions we're taking? And some of these items they're all dependent. They're all interconnected in a manner that may not fit your view of the environment currently, because there might be some bias of saying, oh, that system is secure. We don't have to worry about it. Let's start over here. And when you introduce the bias in there, now you start to head down the wrong path. So as an investigator, the interesting part is when you start to go down a path, you start to try and dig out all those pieces along the lines of that path. So one little tidbit is, if you go into an escape room, right, usually they say the people who are organized are the ones that are able to split up in such a manner that they have a strategic way of, one, going about searching, but also announcing what's happening to somebody who's going to centrally write it down and kind of almost project manage. So if you were to take this attribute in such a manner that it fits your environmental scheme, or what we're talking about with detective, you can have your investigation procedure kind of follow the same path, right? So you don't have overlapping individuals. You have that strategic pattern of, okay, this is what we know. This is the path we're going down. The reason why I bring that up is, if you're in that escape room, if somebody is leading and they're leading everybody the same way, you're going down the path that may be the wrong one, but you continue to go down, right? And that's how people end up searching. Oh, it's in the light fixture, right? And it's like, no, we didn't put anything in the light fixture, right? Because the one person heard about a time somebody put it in a light fixture, right? So of course they have to go down that route. But when that happens, you can see how it can burn up a lot of time. So as a responder, you want to have that strategic approach that you can investigate in such a manner that something like we were just talking about, where, hey, can we do something that actually enhances our capabilities a little bit more? Like, this blog post touches upon in a manner that fits our environmental in the proper way. So I think that's one of the key thought process that you want to go about and kind of dive into. And if you ever get to part of like, I don't know how to start with detective, I stress this part and I say it 3 times for the people on the other side of the internet, because the first part of understanding and stepping into what is detective is going to the page that says what is detective. And then the other little tidbit I would always say is go to the security pages, right? And say, hey, security of the cloud and in the cloud. Important concept to understand, but also to dive into the different sections of, hey, how does detective work with IAM? Right? Administrator accounts. Think of your AWS organization. Think of, okay, how do I make sure somebody doesn't take all this information that I'm gathering and know everything about my environment? That's why least privilege, least privilege, least privilege. I say it 3 times to summon that into your environment, because least privilege is an important mechanism and tool that you want to leverage, especially having identity-based policies, right? So use conditions, further restrict, all that good stuff. These are all parts of the different pieces of security you want to implement into your environment. So the question I asked to chat is, what will keep you up at night? And will this help to solve it? Right? Because if you're trying to unmask what happened within the environment, like a good episode, you start to think of, oh, it was the janitor, or it was the groundskeeper. It was always the groundskeeper. But that's a tangent for days like, well, they were the one with all the keys. But that's exactly the thing. If a security incident is happening within your environment, you want to make sure you don't have the bias, you have the people in place, you have the procedures, you have the tools, you have the incident response plan. I say it because I have to summon Russ in essence for that piece, where build an incident response plan, a very important part of your overall security posture, as well as taking the steps one by one to build up experience points, because every XP point helps you to level up not only yourself, but your environment and the people around you. And I don't know about you, but if there is a bunch of monsters that we are trying to unmask within our environment, I would like everybody to be leveled up in my party. So with that note, feel free, reach out. Let us know what, side quests you went on, what excursions, what level of maturity you're on, and how you plan to kind of continue that path down. And feel free to come back every Monday, 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. So we can discuss, we can talk about it, and we can figure out and shine some light into the haunted pieces of your infrastructure. And I'm going on vacation, so you'll probably see a little bit of a rotation, an unknown face, but you also see a known face. So until next time, feel free to join next week and find out who is here. So thank you, take care, and have a great rest of your week. Happy Monday.